Hmm. All right, good afternoon, all. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Um, Before we officially get started, if you could share your name in the chat, your role, and your location. And I believe Luis is going to get us started.
All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Adult Social Emotional Learning Implementation, our first session. As we get started, please go ahead and share your name, role, and location in the chat as we go in. We're going to go ahead and start with checking in with each other. We're going to be using Slido today for our interactions, slido.com. And if you're new to Slido, if you just go ahead and open a browser tab, and I'm going to type it here in the chat too, go to www.slido.com. You'll be able to join our interactions today, and the code is R548. And the slides will move along with us if you have never seen it before. And if you don't want to be moving between tabs, you're also welcome to respond in the chat inside of Zoom, right? Because our days are so busy, and sometimes we just want to be in one place for a second, and that's okay too. But if you could please join us on slido.com, you're going to see a screen that looks kind of like this here, where we'll be able to answer the questions as we go along. Okay, so our first question for you guys is, how are you feeling today? Okay, where are we at right now? Where is the room? You know, usually walk into a PD or a web or a professional development and we can see how everybody's doing. So let's just kind of feel where we're at today. Are we overwhelmed and stressed? Are we calm and relaxed? Are we energized and excited? Are we tired and need a nap? Are we just feeling something else right now? So you can engage with us. And also you're welcome to type in the chat if you don't want to have another tab open. I would just take a moment as people are joining us to kind of see how we are today. All right, seeing kind of we're a little overwhelmed and overwhelmed and stressed right now. So you can always take a moment to breathe. If you haven't taken a stretch, you can do so right now and let some of that stress go. And get ready to engage with us as we start our adult SEL session. Okay. Cool. And this interaction will move along with us as we go. And as we're starting and acknowledging the room, why do we do these types of activities, right? Because we need to build connections and community. We're about to engage with each other. We're going to engage in some new learning, and we want to make sure we're ready for it, right? And also, pandemic distance learning has created a big need to connect with each other in ways that we normally would. So usually we'd kind of feel each other out, say, how's it going? How's everybody doing? Okay. And that just helps reinforce our community. Okay, so we want to make sure that we always start with the why, and these welcoming activities always help us connect with each other and just see how everybody's doing. All right, so I'm going to pass it on over.
Thank you, Luis. Hi, everyone. My name is Felicia Singleton, and I'm one of the directors at San Diego County Office of Education, and I am Director of System of Supports on the Student Services and Program side of the house. So mouthful, but really excited to be here today. And one thing we feel is very important is that we talk about the distinction between social and emotional learning and mental health. So while there is some overlap, we want to be clear that when you talk about social and emotional learning, we don't want educators in the classroom or outside of the classroom or site leaders to feel like they are making a diagnosis for students. So while there is some overlap, there may be a student who has a clinically diagnosable mental health condition that may not have all the SEL competencies or vice versa. So we hope that from this session and throughout, we will make sure that we are really delineating that clear line between SEL and mental health. Okay. So this slide here really is how we separate the two, right? So there's the SEL bubble and then there's the mental health bubble. And again, there's the assumption that SEL programming directly addresses mental health needs of students. And that in some ways could be true depending on your system and what your referral process is, but in no way does SEL encompass all the mental health conditions that exist, like depression or anxiety disorders or PTSD or obsessive compulsive disorders. So what we're really inviting you to do and giving you permission to do as an educator is take that off your plate. We're going to be spending time really looking at the competencies. And of course, we're starting with ourselves, with the adults, but don't feel like you are now a therapist or a counselor that has to diagnose your students. So we're going to show you a video, and we'd love for you to just sit back, relax, and engage with it as much as possible. And then we'll have a conversation after the video.
Hey, Mr. Q. Did you see that? Why would somebody do that?
Please go into the classroom, no talking, quietly.
Hey, Miss Merida, how you doing?
We need you inside.
How do you think that makes us feel? I forgot my number.
What's your name?
Jordan?
What's your last name?
Carter?
All right. Go ahead.
School is hard enough.
Come on in, sit down quietly at your desks, and begin writing.
This kind of stuff just makes it harder.
I said quietly, please. Who's talking? Is it you, Sophie? Don't let it be you.
Don't believe me?
Sophie.
Please just watch.
I'm not up here for me, I'm up here for you. Pay attention, okay? Now somebody answer me. Somebody needs to answer me really fast.
Every time we're ignored or yelled at or silenced, a teacher takes away what's possible.
No horseplay, no running, and especially no talking.
Moment by moment.
Miss Garrity, your students' behavior yesterday in the lunchroom, it was terrible. Next time, silent lunch.
Did you hear that? Stay in line and catch a bubble. I'm not playing.
If this is education, we're in trouble. Bye, Miss McGarrity. Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. The way it is now, 2 of the 3 of us will never be able to really read. It doesn't have to be this way.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Everyone we meet throughout our day can make a difference.
I've been waiting for you to arrive.
All the difference.
Good, how are you?
Great.
Hi, Jordan. Bye, Jason.
Good morning, Jordan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good.
Go ahead and put your number in.
Talk with us, not at us.
That's okay. I'll look it up for you. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right. Have a
Teach us what we need to know.
good morning.
That's how we get smarter.
Well, good morning, Sophie, Janicia, and Jordan.
And when you talk with us and teach us, give us bigger and bigger words.
Now what I'd like you to do, children, is turn around and converse with your neighbor and discuss where the mother might have gone.
Words that we can use to read and understand.
She is prey for eagles, so she hunts at night.
And that will take us places we can never reach without you.
Remember, we're entering the learning zone. Now, how can we show our respect to the children and teachers who are working?
We can walk quietly.
Yes. Okay, kids, so what I'd like you to do is continue writing your narrative, documenting your emotions if you were the baby owl and your mother abandoned you in the nest.
What can you do? Learn all that you can so that you can challenge us to be our best.
You would have stayed and assisted them in whatever they needed.
Share yourself with us and show us how to share ourselves with others. Give us courage. Give us compassion. Help us find our own voices so we can become who we are meant to be. Why would you want to silence us?
Wow. I don't know about you, but I've seen this video, I can't tell you how many times, and each and every time I see it, I think about my own experience as a student, and then what control I have as an educator, whether I was in the classroom or as a counselor or as a site administrator. What's my control? What's a locus of my control? So I'd like if we can just spend a few seconds just thinking about that. What is our opportunity to provide a positive, to make a positive impact in the lives of not just students, but our colleagues, the adults on campus, parents as they enter the campus. What is our opportunity to positively impact someone's life or someone's experience? So with that, we are going to do another Slido. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, what opportunities do you have to positively impact someone's day today? I'm going to open my Slido on my phone. You can do it on the web, or you can scan the QR code. These are great. Say hello to a colleague, smile, acknowledge, it's good to see you again. Write a thank you note. Please and thank you. Wow. Smile at them. Giving positive and helpful feedback on something a colleague has worked on. These are all excellent examples and show that it's not, you don't necessarily have to go to a training or spend money on anything to have a positive impact on someone's day. So thank you all for participating.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Melissa Spaden. I am also Director of Systems Supports, just like Felicia, but I'm on the other end in Learning and Leadership Services, so on our academic side. And my area of expertise and focus is assessment. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the research base. And if you will extend some grace to me right now, as my young coworker is on the other side of the wall and is very vocal these days. So why do we focus so much, not just on SEL, but also SEL for adults? Well, we know that an ongoing focus on really comprehensive, integrated social emotional learning can have a strong improvement in social emotional competencies, their attitudes, behaviors of students. It increases academic achievement, which we know is very important, but it's more than just the academic skills. It helps students have the ways of managing themselves in working towards goals, helps students have on-time graduation from high school and college, and has helped students with their employability. It also helps students grapple with some personal challenges. So it gives them the skills that they need outside of those those clinical mental health issues, help students overcome those personal challenges, both emotional, behavioral, decreases in police involvement, and also decreases in social service involvement. But adults benefit too. It's not just students. So a lot of the research has specifically been around teachers, but educators as a whole, teachers who are skilled in social emotional competencies, they're more likely to stay in the classroom longer because they can manage the challenging situations that their students face. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, about that burnout, which is that we have that compassion fatigue a lot of the time. And then there's very strong associations between the social emotional skills and adult outcomes in all of the areas that we spoke to earlier, but also in mental health. And so you're going to see that theme that while social emotional learning doesn't address mental health, it helps improve some of those mitigating circumstances that make our mental health circumstances poorer. And I'm not going to go through all of these points, but statistically significant associations is really what you should take away. That between the measured social emotional skills in kindergarten and young adult outcomes, so kindergartners who are stronger, and this is obviously longitudinal studies, they're more likely to graduate from high school, complete a college degree, and have stable employment. and less likely to be involved with police, live in public housing, receive public assistance in a detention facility. Again, these are not things that are that work in isolation, but when schools and systems are focused on improving social emotional competencies in students and adults, we see long-term benefits. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Luis to talk a little bit about ourselves and taking care of ourselves.
Hello, everybody. My name is Luis Lopez. I'm an equity and culture teacher on special assignment in Sweetwater Union High School District, but I mainly work with social emotional learning in systems and curriculum. So why do we start with adult SEL? I know that Melissa touched on it a little bit, but there's a saying that you've got a Maslow before you can bloom. And it's true for us just as much as it's true for our students, right? And with everything that's going on right now, we might just be hopefully just getting our psychological needs and our safety needs met, right? And a bonus right now, if we have love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. So how are these two interrelated? How is Maslow related to Bloom, to remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating? It's just to take a step back that we all need this, our students need this. And how do we cultivate this in our adults? Before I was lucky enough to be here with you today, I was just learning about one of our schools in Sweetwater that took 3 years to cultivate the adult soil. They did 3 years of adult SEL work, and they're reaping the benefits now, right? You got to till the soil. You got to make people feel like they belong so they can get to self-actualization. So we start with the adults because we want this for us as much as we want this for our students as well. All right, and these are a collection of mental health needs that we have. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can just take a look and see if maybe there's anything here that you can relate with as to why we cultivate the soil with adults first.
And I'll share if you haven't seen this, any of these conversations, this is pulled from an educator group on Facebook called Pandemic Pedagogy. And it's educators from across the world, K-12 and beyond, where they discuss different issues they're having. And the prompt was, what, if anything, are your organizations doing in terms of self-care and educator, I think it was mental health and well-being. There were, at last check, I believe there were 500 plus comments, ranging from short like none to long, long paragraphs.
So we tend to think about SEL as a standalone, right? Social emotional learning, because we do want these great social emotional supports for our students. But sometimes it's good to take a step back and just reflect on how can we get these supports to our students and in what do they exist, right? Because everything exists in a context. We could think about things that are in our context right now, right? In our community, at the school sites we work with, the people we work with, and how that affects us as adults, and how that as us as adults casts a shadow in the environments we're part of, right? So we do want to get to these supports. And part of this series, we're going to be taking a probe into exactly how this works together. Social emotional learning doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it really reflects our ability to be able to manage the challenges on a day-to-day, and also to create a little breathing room for us, right? And really kind of get the supports we need as adults in order to do this work. Not to be complacent with how things are, but to give us a little breathing room and support to be able to get this kind of work to our students.
So if you want to take a minute and think about what your role is in the ecosystem, this is one of the questions in your note-taking document, just to sort of prompt, what is your role? Where do you fit into this social emotional learning ecosystem of care, as we were calling it? If you care to share out in the chat, if not, that's always fine as well.
So, besides the word unprecedented, SEL has been the word of COVID-19. In the education world, it's we need SEL, we need SEL, we need SEL, without a lot of conversation of what SEL looks like, which is why we're here today. So what does it look like and how can we start doing SEL right now? So 3 signature practices are really 3 ways that as educators, you can start to infuse these in your practice, but more importantly, as adults, we need it as well, right? So we're starting with ourselves. So number 1, welcoming activities. So a greeting for inclusion or beginning with a welcoming inclusion activity, something that we could do at the start of a staff meeting or a department meeting or a grade level meeting. And it can be done virtually, but it creates this culture that establishes both safety and predictability, and it supports the contribution of everyone's voice. So to be effective, these have to be authentic, they have to be worn, and they have to be accompanied by appropriate eye contact and body language. So for instance, if you're doing a check-in circle and someone's reading the paper, you can do the circle, but it's not authentic, right? Because everyone is not fully engaged. So that's number 1. Number 2 is engaging practices. So attentive listening, embed engaging strategies throughout the experience. So just like children, adults also want to know that they have been heard and seen every day. So attentive listening improves the quality of the thinking and speaking of the person who is talking, and it allows the listener time to understand the full message of what is being said. So what does that mean? That means brain breaks. That may mean a mindful moment in the middle of a training. That may mean stand up and stretch. That may mean something like think, ink, pair, and share. So you're able to process and utilize these different modalities of learning rather than just sit and get, but you feel heard and you feel seen and you feel acknowledged. And then lastly, optimistic closure. So that's a time of reflection. So what did we do in our meeting? And then what do we have to look forward to moving forward? And it ends each experience on an optimistic closure. So I want to be clear, ending on an optimistic closure does not necessarily mean that it's cheerful, but it means that we appreciate the time we spent together and we provide a positive closure and we reinforce the topic. So what was important today? Let's recap. What are our next steps? What do we need to do moving forward before the next meeting? So it's a way to acknowledge the hard work that everyone has done and then set some parameters or some steps on what we need to do to move forward.
So if you want to take a moment in your organizer, your note-taking document, we asked the question, how could you incorporate these into your life? And we want you to take a moment to think about how this might apply in whatever your context is, whether you're a classroom educator, whether you're school-based, district-based, charter organization, just taking a moment to think about that.
Thank you, Melissa. And also your role. So in education, we have this system of certificated and classified, but we want to make sure here we're blurring that line because there is a role for everyone when it comes to these SEL practices. So if you manage the front office, if you are the custodian, or if you work in the cafeteria or a bus driver, how can you incorporate these in your practice? And that was what we were hoping to also show in the video earlier.
I see a comment in the chat I want to address too as we're thinking about these. I see one. What do you think causes negative feelings from staff when participating in welcoming relationship building activities during staff meetings? I'm not sure if I get the context of what you're saying, but I think I get it like this, is that sometimes there might not be a good response to these kinds of activities. And it just made me kind of remind a caveat that when doing adult SEL, it has to be really authentic, right? Like we have to be real with it. There's things there's way we do this with kids and there's ways we do it with adults, and just being mindful that, maybe sometimes the adults won't be ready for these kinds of activities. And hopefully that the leadership we're working with recognizes that we're going to have to be able to get to that point, right? Where these activities are welcomed and they look forward to maybe a little investigation or maybe some healing that needs to happen before really engaging in these.
And also you need to think about the risk level of the prompt you're asking. If you've never engaged your staff in any community building, there's no trust, and the first prompt is name the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, there's going to be some feelings. People are going to feel some type of way about jumping to that. So that authenticity has to happen. And then you have to this is not something that you just do and then you're done. This is a journey. So as you continue to build that trust and build those relationships, then people are more apt to have a positive takeaway. We don't want this to be negative. So maybe it's name a success you've had this week. Name something positive, keeping it to where people can have something to contribute and then walk away feeling positive is super helpful.
I think I can add to that with Felicia that it's that a lot of people just aren't okay right now. A lot of people really aren't okay. And so finding a way, like Felicia said, that folks can respond in a positive manner. So making sure that you're not just asking people how they're doing and then moving on, because that authenticity and that care really matter. And so, a lot of it depends on the circumstance, on the environment, and really down to the question. One of the things that my team does quite a bit, and this is absolutely goofy, but we have that grid of 9 images. And a lot of times we'll just pull up different one. We had Baby Yoda, we have Betty Davis, the art classics, 1 to 9, which are you feeling? And that's a nice, really low level, safe way to start out a conversation, to break the ice. But we're not trying to get to people's deeper feelings in that. Whereas in a smaller team meeting, we use the mood meter. And we talk about where we're feeling on the mood meter. And if you haven't seen that, it's a grid, with from positive to negative, with stress to relaxed. And so you can look at the mood meter and you say how you're feeling. And that's a smaller team where we feel safe with each other to have those conversations. And so it's really contextual. And again, you've just got to keep in mind that some people just aren't okay right now, and that any welcoming activity has to, start with empathy, putting yourselves in the shoes of people that you might not really understand what they're going through at the moment. Thank you, Jewel, for sharing that. You never know what narrow topic will trigger. Yeah. So ensuring that something is safe and welcome enough. And I think really, like Felicia shared, something that people can respond to with something positive. So I know that a lot of folks do things like, what is it, rose, thorn, and bud? But really just sharing what's your rose for the week and not touching upon the thorn or the bud, because people might not be able to think of something that they'd feel comfortable sharing.
Thank you.
Something to be mindful of as well is we're all on a different level of spectrum of being comfortable with these kinds of activities. I find myself, as an SEL facilitator, I'm really comfortable. That doesn't mean everybody is, right? And we got to be mindful if we're going to be hosting these kinds of activities, that this can be a real uncomfortable experience for some people, because we're all different levels of vulnerability, right? Going back to Maslow, before we can bloom. So basically they can just, how can we meet people where they're at?
So with that, hopefully we've made you feel somewhat safe. Because I would love if someone could read paragraph 1.
I can read it.
Thank you.
It says, the promise of social and emotional development as a lever for increasing educational equity rests on the capacity of educators to understand that all learning is social and emotional, and all learning is mediated by relationships that sit in a socio-political racialized context for all children, not just those who are Black and brown.
Thank you. Is it Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
Thank you,
Thank
Andrea.
you.
And can I get one more volunteer to read the second paragraph, please?
I can read it. Social emotional learning offers the possibility of acknowledging, addressing, and healing from the ways we have all been impacted by racism and systemic oppression, and to create inclusive, liberatory learning environments in which students of color and students living in poverty experience a sense of belonging, agency, to shape the content and process of their learning and thrive.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
So with the reading of that definition, we are going to utilize one of the engaging practices of think time. So while the definition is up there, if you can just take about 30 seconds to think about this definition, and then think about what words or what phrases stand out to you the most. So we're going to take about 30 seconds and think about what words or phrases stands out to us the most. Okay, so now what I'd like for you to do, either digitally or old-fashioned pen and paper, if you could write that word or that phrase down. And if we've done that, we can move to the next slide. Do they need to see the next slide, Luis?
I'm gonna go ahead and shift to sharing my screen so we can see the interaction popping up. If you guys haven't already, over on Slido, on our Slido tab, and if you're just joining us, you can join us at slido.com with the letter number R548, and those words, that word or phrase that you just wrote down and that stood out. If you would want to kind of put that in the Slido, we'll kind of see what we're thinking about. What is the word or phrase that stand out to us as a community?
We're going to make a community word wall here.
So as you guys join the interaction, we can see that word healing is really standing out to us right now.
Which says a lot about our climate.
You see these words getting bigger. You can see more community is kind of commenting on the same thing. We see healing and promise as being a predominantly word that stand out.
This is powerful. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to our community word wall.
Cool. Did you want to comment on anything else before we move on to the next slide?
No.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm just going to read this quote to you. Planning in the midst of uncertainty. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can.
So with that mindset, we are going to talk a little bit about the social emotional competencies, as well as the competencies needed now. If you're not familiar with CASEL's competencies, they are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. However, CASEL recently adapted them, and I say that recently, but I think this was back in either March or April of last year, because it seems like March was last week, but it's also almost a year ago. So in times of the pandemic and all of the political unrest and just some of the awful events of 2020 continuing into 2021, CASEL updated the social emotional competencies, and they call it the ones needed now, that take into account all that has happened recently. And so those social emotional competencies include some new things like focusing on how our emotions or the personal identity and how it connects to current events, recognize and counteract our biases, as well as work through complex emotions triggered by current events, which I know for a lot of that, some of the events have really been painful. Really being aware of how understanding how the things that you do impacts others, how the things that you say impact others, being aware of racial and social bias, taking action to support social justice, and then building positive relationships with others who are different from me. And so a lot of these have been adapted. And because of that, our team thought about how these really look in a framework that is focused on social justice, that is liberatory, that really looks to how we can support ourselves, support our students, support our colleagues, and the unique individuals that we all are. And moving away from the way SEL has often been done, to be honest, for compliance purposes, and really focusing on how SEL can be something that is focused on each individual and helping them set their goals and focus on improving themselves, but also improving the system in which they are working and contributing. So the SEL competencies, we have gone from there and we thought about what are some of the best ways of thinking about how we do this well, how we're doing, taking care of ourselves. And so, Louise, if you go to the next slide, we have the CASEL SEL self-assessment. It was for 2020, but sadly, this is all still true right now, and we are still in pandemic times. So we've also called it the self-assessment for 2021. So this should be linked within your note-taking document. But if you don't have that, I can share a copy within the chat. What we want to do is give you a few minutes to take some time and complete this. My colleagues and I on my team have done this. We've done this, I think, about once every 6 weeks. We take a look and see if we're treating ourselves better than we're treating others, because that tends to be we take care of others before ourselves, even though we're supposed to put our own mask on first. So take a few minutes, open the link, and go ahead and do the self-assessment. If you want to turn your camera off, so you're not doing what I often do, which is getting really close to the screen while we read. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to go ahead and do some reading and self-assessing. And then there are questions at the bottom as well that ask you to reflect a little bit and think about how you're doing on taking care of yourself and taking care of others, and what next steps do you want to take. So we'll come back about 4:16. This is a great opportunity to take a bit of a stretch break if you need, or I have a tiny, so a wiggle break if you need as well. Okay, so thank you for the relaxing music, Felicia. Very much appreciated. So we're going to, I believe Louise has it set up. Hopefully you had some time to reflect and think about it. I find it interesting to consistently do this self-assessment because I've noticed that each time it changes, because you realize one thing that you need to focus on more, you focus on that, and then you realize maybe there's something else that I could be doing as well. So in the past, my team has all said that they've needed to focus more on responsible decision making, which is not a surprise when you take a look at the fact that this is really focusing on taking care of yourself, seeking help from others, and advocating for your priorities. Okay.
Hope this is an interesting activity to do for you, because it's great work for the kids, right? To get them all the skills that they need to be successful. Just as a reflective, how do we do this work for ourselves? This kind of work, it's easy to prescribe. It's hard to do. It's a challenge, but the experience has been personal growth, right? I've always found that the strongest way to teach social emotional learning is to do the work yourself, and then to share the stories about it. Right? So as we do this reflective work, think about how these areas are in your life.
Okay. Thank you, Louise, for taking us through that. Right. So if there is anything people would like to share, and again, it is completely up to you, but what is one thing that you're going to do to better support yourself or others? So one goal you might have set for yourself after doing your self-assessment. Type it in the chat to share out. Thank you. Seek help. That is one of the hardest things to do. And one thing that I try to force myself to do more of, seeking help when it's needed. Thank you, Natalie. This is one of my personal goals as well, staying connected with people I love and care about. It's very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day stressors, I think it's called often the whirlwind of work and life, and not quite remembering to reach out to those, especially those who are in a very different boat than you at the moment. We find ourselves gravitating towards those who are in kind of the same situation of us, whether it's folks who are flying solo at the moment and isolating on their own, whether it's those who also have families with small children. We end up just sort of reaching out to those folks. Manage and narrow priorities. There's so much urgency to support the field, but I need to support myself too. Very true. So just want you to walk away thinking about why that matters, and to try to set a goal for yourself to do whatever that is before we see each other again next week. For adult SEL specifically, the CASEL framework focuses on 3 things. The first one is learning. And so like Louise mentioned, we really need to learn what SEL looks and feels like for ourselves before we can implement it in our classrooms, in our schools, and our workplaces. Collaborating, so figuring out what is that structure for doing that work together, to learn together, and really how to mentor each other in this work and to keep improving. And then the last part is modeling. So it's like what we're doing today. We're working through the 3 signature practices with you. We're giving you opportunities to reflect, to self-assess. I know assessment is, for many of you, a very dirty word. It's one of my favorites. But without reflection without assessment, we don't know, first of all, we don't know whether what has taught has been learned, but also we can't figure out if there's any improvement. And so we won't know if our SEL skills are improving if we don't take the time to reflect. So Luis is going to take us through some activities now to rest our minds and our souls a little bit as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And if nobody's told you today, you are more than enough. Okay, because I know right now we're struggling with that enoughness, and you're more than enough because you're here today. And just to kind of share that love for you being here, you know, you're here because this matters to you, and you're taking on systems and you're doing so much more, so that you're appreciated. I wanted to share a quote with you from my man Deepak Chopra. A quiet mind is better than a positive mind. That sometimes it's okay to step back and just be present. You know, it's kind of sometimes a little bit hard to be too optimistic when things are uncertain. And it's just really draining to be negative all the time. So where does that leave us? Right? There's a space in between called presence. And it's about, I think, quieting the mind right now, I think, is what we can do. So if you haven't done so today, you can take a little moment to do some box breathing. And the way the box breathing works is you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold. You breathe out. And you hold. So if you'd like to take a moment to breathe, you can breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. And hold. So we deal with these kind of activities for us because in times like these, there can be a lot of anxiety, right? And what's anxiety? But irrational fears. There's rational fears out there for sure. Anxiety stems from the ones that are just overtaking our thoughts, right? So how do we get out of our thoughts? And what you can do is you can do an anxiety countdown. Okay, so what are 5 things that you can see at the moment? Could be your hands, could be the clock on your wall, could be maybe the painting or something that you have in the room. What are 4 things you can physically feel, right? And obviously right now we're probably not going to be with people, but maybe you can feel your feet on the ground, and maybe you can feel the desk, right? Things that are around you. And what are 3 things you can hear? Take a moment to listen for those sounds. What are 2 things you can smell? And what is 1 thing you can taste, if any? There's a variation of this technique that I usually do after work because, you know, sometimes we've just been going at it all day and we need to separate from work. So a practice that I've been doing that's related to this is after work, stepping outside for 5 minutes and just listening to silence. Taking a moment just to disconnect from everything and get out of your mind, right? And just into being in the moment so you can be ready for the next thing that's going to come into your life. So we want to share this with you as an activity that when you are feeling anxious, to take that anxiety countdown, to take a step away. I want to share this quote from you from Stephanie Jones. It is difficult, if not impossible, for adults to help students build skills that they themselves do not possess. It is vital then for adults working in educational settings to have strong SEL skills themselves. It reminds me of a book that really got me into this work, The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And it was about 50 principles, and they were little short reads. And I just remember reading each one and thinking about personal growth. And one of the practices that I employed into my life is the rule of a third. Is you spend a third of the time of people you mentor, a third of the time of people that you're with, that are with you on your level, and another third of the time of people that are ahead of you of where you want to be, right? And they kind of pull you alongside you. So personal growth and SEL might look different to each one of us. And it's just ask the question, you know, how do we want to grow? Because we're empowered to be able to do that. And you have the right to grow. So I want to pass it over to Melissa to kind of recap today's journey and before we exit out of today's session.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if anybody would like to take a moment to share in the chat. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to find out what others are doing to relax or to have self-care, take care of themselves. So Luis, I love that, taking 5 minutes to just disconnect. I have a ritual at the end of the day where I turn everything off in my office. It's symbolic because this is my office. It's also our guest room and our file cabinet room and our everything storage room. So for me, it's kind of symbolic, but I turn things off and then I leave the room, and that means work is done for the day, whatever time that might be. I also love the breathing. The donut breathing is one of my favorite ones to do. It's what we're teaching our toddler to do. And it's one thing that I'm not sure if you've done this before either, but with young students, teaching them to breathe when they're upset actually does help them calm down. And so doing that as well as an adult, all of those things that we teach children of any age, taking a moment to apply those to ourselves. So today's journey, we started out with our welcoming activity, talked about some opportunities for positive impact with your colleagues, yourself, your friends, shared a little bit of research to support the work, talked about the ecosystem of care, our 3 signature practices, intersection of equity and SEL, and defining SEL as more than just the 5 competencies, the SEL competencies and self-assessment. So making sure that we're taking care of ourselves and articulating and sharing how we will do that, making that public so we follow through. A few mindfulness activities for us to take with us, and then our short reflection, which I believe Luis has on the last slide. So our last Slido, if you could share.
So if you guys can please navigate back to slido.com. And if you didn't get a chance to join us with that code, and tell us what is one word that describes your experience in this session today. And we will use it as feedback. You're also welcome to type in the chat if that's easier for you as well. Thank you for your wonderful feedback on this calming session. And hopefully you'll be able to join us for some more sessions and where we probe deeper and further. Felicia and Melissa, if you want to have some closing words for our wonderful audience.
I'd just like to thank everyone for trusting us and spending your time. We know our time is very valuable, and you deciding to spend an hour with us today it means a lot to us. And please share the information with your friends and colleagues. We have sessions running from today all the way through May, I believe. And we purposely did them 1 hour, just a little nugget. And we purposely did them at 3:30, hoping to be able to make this time doable for educators across education. So thank you for spending some time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again.
And to those who registered through OMS, we will be sending you all the links as a follow-up, as well as the recording. So thank you for attending. We'll see you next week.